Hey Gators, and welcome to Terrorism in Europe Part 3. I wanted to show you this bit of news journalism that I thought was actually quite good. It's called To Catch a Terrorist, How France is Battling the Threat from Within. So we're going to shift from a general focus on the EU and the UK and kind of move more into France and Germany and some of these other countries to get a better sense of what other areas of Europe are doing. So we're going to move forward here. So first we're going to talk about the arrests. So these are some officers in France that are working on counterterrorism efforts. Okay, and again, it's sometimes needle in a haystack type stuff that you have to deal with. So it's summer of 2013 in Paris. Counterterrorism investigators are chasing a jihadi recruiting network associated with Salim Benhalem, a French citizen and wanted terrorist seeking to bring foreign fighters into the rapidly escalating war in Syria. So this seems like a long time ago, but it really isn't that long ago. What began as a trickle of recruits into the conflict will soon become a flood. As many as 2,000 will eventually leave France for Iraq or Syria, more than any other country in Europe, according to European authorities. The challenge for counterterrorism officials is sifting out among these returnees who is a real threat. Okay, so they start identifying people that look like they might start acting and maybe plotting attacks. Eventually they identify Hajidi and they take him into custody and they arrest a few other people. And they search out his home and they find some items of note, and I'll show you what those are. By the time officials finish questioning him, he's indicted for criminal conspiracy to prepare acts of terrorism, which carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. The three other men are also charged with the same crime. Benhalem is indicted in absentia. He's going to continue to carry out executions on behalf of ISIS in Syria and eventually become a suspect in plots against France, including the 2015 Paris attacks. So when they searched his apartment, they found the following items: foreign currency from Britain, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Thailand, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. Envelopes filled with cash totaling 26,000 euros, air guns, bank statements, a certificate from a mobile university that trains imams, books about Islam, CDs and DVDs containing jihadi content, an SD card with deleted maps of the Middle East, maps of conflict zones and propaganda images, and a laptop with searches for night vision binoculars and military strategies in Syria and other files linked to radical Islam. So those are the kind of things you'd be looking for in a police raid. So we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail, but I want to bring this forward. So Syria and back. So when we're looking at trying to identify who potential terrorist actors are, you often run into issues with immigration, issues with profiling, and so forth. And so when you think about intelligence issues and sharing of intelligence, and trying to go country to country, it's not the easiest thing to do. So Syria was descending into civil war, and people were fleeing to Western European cities during that war and that conflict. They said in the beginning he wanted to learn the Quran. He seemed just to be a lost soul. I advised him like a younger brother, get a job, stabilize, learn Arabic and the Quran, work and assimilate. You're in a new country now. And essentially we see something of protests actually escalating in Syria. So we're moving from civil war to protest. These are hundreds of Syrians marching in Damascus in the protests. And people kind of watching from abroad tend to get a little restless and nervous about what's happening. Eventually he made the decision to go to Syria and claims during police interrogations that he wants to provide food or help drive vehicles to refugees. So it's kind of an interesting story as it plays out. Hajid is introduced to another co-conspirator on a soccer field in Paris or a football arena. And essentially when you migrate, you start to kind of get into what we call ghettos or migrant neighborhoods and migrant communities. And that is something that is really being discussed quite a bit in Europe as to how to go about managing these ghettos or these migrant communities, because there is a worry that jihadism or extremism might emerge during all the disarray and with the anxiety and the trauma that everyone's been through. But other people will say these are just people fleeing violence. You should leave them alone. They're trying to connect to people of their same culture. Why are you investigating them? And it gets to be very, very challenging because it's a mixture of both privacy and security, a theme that we talk about a lot in this class. So eventually he meets up with other people. They eventually cross the border and they start working their way toward Turkey and Syria. And this is a map that kind of shows you some of that. Along the way, Hajidis witnessed bombings. They were escorted to a warehouse where fighters were based. In those days, groups were more or less united. They were in contact with each other online. We were greeted by members of ISIS. They started to feel part of the cause. A few days later, a surprise coalition of the Free Syrian Army called for general mobilization. I was taken with the fighters to help stop the offensive. So he's starting to engage in the conflict directly. But what's interesting is there was a wiretap intercepted, and this conversation starts to prove that he participated in an attack. Was he an attack? Really? Yeah. The first or second one, the second one, for months they've been waiting. He arrived and boom, straight away. So this is kind of where we talk about surveillance of these types of terrorists in other countries. But then he said, I became disillusioned by my experience in Syria, and the battle accelerated my efforts to go home. I thought about risking my life, making orphans of my children, a widow of my wife, and they start to have second thoughts. He eventually goes back to Turkey. And here we see him kind of trying to decide what he's going to do. And again, this kind of follows the whole path, but this is a path that I thought was worth talking about. Over the next 2 years, he would be accused of criminal conspiracy on the Paris attacks. And you actually see the photo here and the Charlie Hebdo attack as well in 2015. So you have to remember, as human beings, we kind of fall in and out of disillusionment with our cause, but sometimes other things start to motivate us back again to really regain our focus. And then eventually the article details the trial. And again, this is what we're talking about. The struggle is today, is how do we not only investigate and identify terrorists, how do we prosecute them? And if we're able to see evidence that will show us that they're trying to do criminal or conspiratory type attacks, then how do we punish them? And what do we do with them? And how long should those sentences be? So in 2015 in Paris, and again, I was there on November 13th, terrorists killed 130 people in Paris. It was one of Paris's most deadly attacks ever. Again, he's going to go under the guise of, I went back to Syria for humanitarian reasons, to try to help people, but he's accused of joining a terrorist group, receiving military training, participating in combat, and financing the groups. He's accused with several other people, and essentially, people are fearing harsh sentences, which to me, a 10-year sentence is not necessarily a harsh sentence, but sentencing in prison and everything in the United States is much more intense than anywhere in the world. I don't know if that's something we're proud of, but we incarcerate more people than anyone in the world. I think that comes with a different mindset, a different psyche about being punitive and using incarceration as a prevention tool. That's another whole debate, another whole class. We could talk about that. So these are just some renditions of the trial and the judge. So eventually, you see the transcripts. The judge says, I went to Syria to participate in jihad. Was it an armed jihad movement or a spiritual one? He said it was both. I was seduced. I was blinded. We're told that we're going to be martyrs. It's all lies. They taught me to assemble, a gun and everything. Were you part of the Islamic State? I don't know. I guess so. And so they're trying to kind of ask him, what were your activities? What was going on in this area? So essentially, again, we're reminded of the Paris 2015 attack and the burden placed on the courts, on the criminal justice system, on the legal system to try to figure out what to do, what we've learned, how to prevent this in the future, and how we go forward. I want to kind of highlight a few more things of the attack and so forth. This is some of the prisons where these guys are kept. behind closed doors. And there are fears as well that, if we incarcerate these people together, are they going to plot attacks from within the prison walls? And are they going to do that? So this, again, is one of the most complicated situations that Europe could find itself in. So since the Paris attacks, the French government has declared a state of emergency, placed hundreds of Muslims under house arrest, conducted thousands of warrantless searches, and that's a very typical response. We have that happen in the United States, where we kind of overstep boundaries, maybe go too far in the name of imminent threat. Up to 15,000 people are being monitored for suspected ties to terrorism, and the laws used to intercept Hajid and others have been invoked in more than 260 cases this year. That's caused an outcry among Muslims in France, who say they're being swept up in the fear. So this causes a lot of human rights issues, abusive, discriminatory raids, there's accusations of that. But at the same time, many in France are questioning the comparatively short prison terms under the current counterterrorism policies in the French government, considering a proposal to increase the sentences, like Hajid's from 10 years to a maximum of 30 years, hoping they age out of terrorism. Muslims account for approximately 60% of the French prison population, according to various estimates. And in recent years, a growing list of French citizens have entered prisons as petty criminals, only to leave as committed jihadis. So that's one perspective being offered and one concern. I don't know that we can validate that completely because we haven't seen a lot of research on that, but that's what's kind of demanding the radicalization or de-radicalization approach to thwarting this. No one knows for sure what the trajectory might be, if French prison system's a revolving door for jihadis. So again, I'm just bringing up these issues. I'm not really trying to weigh in one way or the other, but I thought this was an interesting article to start to raise some questions about how we go about this whole thing of preventing terror in Europe. And so I just wanted to share this article with you so you could start to see more of the complications of the conflict. And we'll see you next time.